You know, usually when we look at the world around us, there's this unspoken expectation of a shared reality.
Right, yeah, we all assume we're seeing the same things.
Exactly. Like you walk down a busy winter street, you see a guy in a battered felt hat, he's carrying a goose, and you probably just think, oh, there goes a guy picking up his dinner.
Right, it's just a completely mundane observation. I
Yeah.
mean, you take it at face value because, frankly, our brains are basically wired to filter out the noise. We just want to get through the day, you know?
Yeah, we have to filter it out. But then you step into the world of Arthur Conan Doyle, and suddenly that comfortable kind of filtered surface is just totally ripped away.
Oh, completely. It's a totally different way of looking at things.
We are looking at this landscape of complex human behavior, and it's just hiding in plain sight.
Mm.
You realize that you aren't actually observing the world at all. You're just passively seeing it. Like, we all see the hat, but almost none of us actually observe the hat.
And that distinction, seeing versus observing, that is the entire foundation of the universe Conan Doyle built.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today on the Deep Dive. We have an incredibly engaging stack of material in front of us for you. We're looking at a comprehensive book review by Haley Huntington, and that is paired directly with this massive audiobook transcript of Arthur Conan Doyle's The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes.
It's a really brilliant collection of source material to dig into. And, Huntington's review makes a really interesting point right off the bat.
Yeah.
Yeah, she actually suggests that a newcomer should read a full-length Sherlock Holmes novel first, just to get a solid grasp of the character dynamics. But, and this is key, she heavily emphasizes that these short stories are uniquely digestible. Like, they are explicitly designed to be consumed in a single sitting.
And that's our mission for you today. We are going to prove that these bite-sized, single-sitting mysteries are actually the perfect masterclass in understanding the mechanics of Sherlock Holmes. We're going to break down exactly how his method of extreme observation works on a technical level and uncover the wildly bizarre human motives he exposes along the way. Think of this as your shortcut to the absolute essence of the world's greatest detective.
But to really understand that method, we first have to understand the architecture of the man's mind. And specifically, we have to look at the one singular individual who fundamentally shattered his perspective on how the world operates.
Right. We have to start with the very first story in the collection, A Scandal in Bohemia. This narrative is just so crucial because it establishes Holmes's baseline character. The text literally describes him as the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen.
A machine. Yeah, that's exactly it.
He's presented as completely cold, just almost robotic in his calculations.
And that coldness, it isn't an accident. It's a highly deliberate, cultivated choice. The source material points out that, to Holmes, human emotion is equivalent to a crack in one of his own high-power microscopic lenses.
Oh, wow. So it's a flaw.
Exactly. It's a fatal distraction. He views human passions merely as tools, right? I mean, they're excellent mechanisms for drawing the veil back from other men's motives, but they are absolutely disastrous if he lets them into his own mind. Pure logic just requires a vacuum.
Which naturally creates a massive blind spot. And enter the King of Bohemia.
Here we go.
Yeah, this is a giant 6'6" monarch dressed in what the story calls barbaric opulence, who secretly hires Holmes. The king is terrified because he had a past relationship with an American opera singer named Irene Adler.
Right, and she has something he wants.
Exactly. She possesses a compromising photograph of the two of them. He's about to marry into a very strict royal family, and he's totally convinced Adler is going to use the photo to ruin the marriage.
So Holmes approaches this problem with his usual, mechanical precision. He deduces immediately that Adler won't trust a bank or a lawyer with something that valuable. She'll have it hidden somewhere inside her own home.
Makes sense.
But he also knows that just tearing the house apart blindly would be inefficient, and it would probably fail if the hiding spot is clever enough. So instead of a physical break-in, he decides to use human psychology against her.
Okay, let's unpack this because his plan is wild. Holmes disguises himself as an amiable, harmless clergyman. He fakes getting injured in a scuffle right outside her front door just so her servants carry him inside to recover.
It's so elaborate.
Right. And then he has his friend Watson throw a plumber's smoke rocket through the open window and literally scream, "Fire!" It is such a brilliant manipulation. It's basically like a modern hacker staging a massive network crash on your computer just to see which backup drive you frantically grab first.
That is a perfect analogy. He relies on a very primal psychological mechanism. In a moment of sudden, overwhelming panic, The brain abandons complex deception and just reverts to sheer self-preservation.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. He knows her deepest, unthinking instinct will be to physically secure her most prized possession. And the mechanism works flawlessly. The cry of fire goes up, she rushes to a secret sliding panel behind a bell pull to grab the photograph, and in doing so, she reveals the exact location to Holmes.
Mission accomplished, or so he thinks.
Right. He fakes a recovery, calls off the false alarm, and leaves, fully planning to just return the next day and simply take it.
But, and this is the absolute kicker of the story, she completely outmaneuvers him. I want to throw this over to you.
Yeah.
Because how does she manage to beat the perfect machine?
What's really fascinating here is Adler's cognitive flexibility. She realizes the trick almost immediately after he leaves, but instead of panicking or, fleeing blindly, she adapts.
She pivots.
Yeah, she recognizes that she's been played by a master, so she employs his own tactics. She actually puts on male clothing, a tailored disguise of her own, and follows Holmes back through the streets of London to his own front door.
That is so bold.
It is. She walks right past him and wishes him a cheerful good night to his face, just to verify his identity. And then she goes home, packs her things, and flees the country with her new husband and the photograph.
She just leaves a letter in that secret panel for him, basically saying, "Nice try, Mr. Holmes. You had me fooled for a minute."
She promises not to blackmail the king, saying she's keeping the photo purely as defensive insurance.
And the king is thrilled, of course.
Right. And when the relieved king tries to pay Holmes with this incredibly valuable emerald ring as a reward, Holmes flat out refuses it. He asks only for the photograph of Irene Adler instead. So what does this all mean? How does a failure of this magnitude impact a guy whose entire identity is built on never being wrong?
Well, it introduces a profoundly necessary humility. Up until this moment, the flawless reasoning machine operated under a kind of intellectual arrogance, particularly regarding women, which is a demographic his Victorian sensibilities had routinely dismissed.
Yeah, but this failure forces him to realize that human ingenuity, especially when it's driven by really powerful, unpredictable forces like self-preservation or love, well, it can completely outmaneuver sterile logic.
It breaks the lens.
Exactly. From that moment on, she is never just Irene Adler to him. She's permanently elevated in his mind to the woman. It primes him for the incredibly complex, unpredictable cases that follow, because he learns never to underestimate the human element again.
And that sets up a really fascinating contrast. Because while complex emotions like love and self-preservation defeat him, he is absolutely unrivaled when it comes to complex physical puzzles. While normal people are completely paralyzed by absurd, convoluted situations, Holmes actually uses the bizarre as a guiding beacon.
Yeah, and this raises a really important question about how we naturally process information. When we encounter a situation that is wildly strange, our instinct is to assume the underlying cause must be equally complicated. We just get overwhelmed by the weirdness. But Holmes operates on the exact opposite principle. He explicitly states that the stranger the setup, the simpler the underlying motive must be, because criminals only invent bizarre, elaborate scenarios when they are trying to hide something very, very basic.
And the sources showcase this perfectly with two wildly strange setups. First, we have the Red-Headed League. This London pawnbroker named Jabez Wilson, who happens to have this flaming red hair, is hired for purely nominal work simply because of his hair color.
Right, makes no sense on the surface.
None. A fake charity pays him £4 a week, which was a huge sum at the time, just to sit in an isolated office for 4 hours a day and copy the Encyclopedia Britannica by hand.
I mean, to a normal person, it sounds like a complete joke. Or maybe the eccentric whim of a rich madman, Wilson's own assistant, this guy named Vincent Spaulding, is actually the one who excitedly urges him to take the job.
Very convenient.
Exactly. And for weeks, Wilson just sits there, dutifully copying the encyclopedia until one day, a piece of cardboard is just tacked to the door saying the league is dissolved. He goes to Holmes, completely bewildered.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The Red-Headed League is essentially a magician's misdirection. The bizarre club, the copying of the encyclopedia, the intense focus on the red hair, it's all just the flashy waving hand meant to hold everyone's attention.
Yeah.
Can you break down how Holmes sees right through the flashy hand?
Sure. So Holmes ignores the encyclopedia entirely and looks at the physical environment. When he visits the pawn shop, he intentionally taps his walking stick vigorously on the pavement outside.
He's not just fidgeting, right?
No, not at all. He's listening to the acoustic resonance of the ground. He wants to determine if it sounds solid or hollow, which would indicate which direction the building's cellar runs. Then he looks at the assistant, Vincent Spaulding. Specifically, he looks at the fabric of the man's trousers. He notices the knees are heavily worn, wrinkled, and stained with dirt. Holmes connects the hollow sound under the street with the worn knees and deduces the truth instantly.
Which is?
The assistant is digging a tunnel from the pawnshop cellar straight into the vault of a neighboring bank. The bizarre, high-paying encyclopedia job was simply an elaborate mechanical lure to guarantee the pawnbroker would be out of the building for exactly 4 hours every single day, just so they could dig without being heard.
It is brilliant, because the motive is just a basic bank robbery, but the method was cloaked in total absurdity. And we see that exact same dynamic in The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, which is honestly just as weird.
Oh yeah, the goose.
Yes, a priceless stolen gemstone, the blue carbuncle, is discovered hiding inside the crop or the throat pouch of a Christmas goose. And Holmes manages to trace the entire crime backwards, starting with absolutely nothing but a battered, abandoned felt hat that was found dropped on the street next to the goose.
The deductions Holmes makes from that hat really showcase the mechanics of his method. He doesn't just look at the hat, he interrogates it. He examines the surface and deduces that the owner's wife no longer loves him.
From a hat.
From a hat. Primarily because it's covered in weeks' worth of fine, undisturbed house dust. Furthermore, he deduces the man has no gaslighting installed in his home because, upon close inspection of the brim, he finds 5 distinct hardened stains from a sputtering tallow candle.
Okay, hang on. I have to pause you there and push back on this logic. To a modern ear, this sounds like Holmes is making massive, unwarranted leaps. Couldn't a guy with a dusty hat just be like a messy bachelor? Or maybe he just forgot to brush it. Why jump straight to universally unloved by his wife?
It is a totally fair challenge, and it really does feel like a leap if you isolate the clues from their environment. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of the Victorian social contract, the logic becomes airtight. Well, in the middle-class society of late 19th century London, a wife's primary social duty was the maintenance of her husband's public respectability. Allowing a husband to leave the house day after day with weeks of accumulated dust on his primary article of outdoor clothing wasn't just messy, it was a profound, visible breakdown of that social contract.
Ah, I see.
Holmes isn't just reading the dust, he's reading the cultural implications embedded in the lack of care. As for the tallow stains, finding 5 separate, distinct drips indicates a repetitive daily action like walking up a drafty staircase every night holding a cheap, guttering candle, which absolutely wouldn't happen if the house was fitted with modern gas lighting.
So every object literally carries the invisible DNA of its owner's daily habits. Which makes me wonder, if someone looked at my jacket right now, what would the coffee stain on the cuff or the frayed pocket edge silently broadcast about my morning?
Exactly. We all leave these physical echoes behind. And that brings us to a crucial transition in Doyle's narrative style. While Holmes uses these flashy, bizarre setups like gem-eating geese to hook us, his actual solutions almost always rely on these deeply mundane physical details.
The trifles.
The trifles, the things the rest of us filter out as background noise.
And we see this power of trifles applied to a pretty heartbreaking domestic tragedy in a case of identity. A young woman named Mary Sutherland is absolutely devastated when her fiancé, a man named Hosmer Angel, just vanishes into thin air on the morning of their wedding. The police are completely baffled, but Holmes solves the entire case without ever leaving his armchair in his sitting room.
He solves it because he realizes the fiancé never actually existed. The missing man is actually Mary's own greedy stepfather in a disguise.
It's so messed up.
It is. The stepfather wanted to maintain strict financial control over Mary's substantial inheritance, which he would lose access to the moment she got married. So he dressed up with tinted glasses and a fake beard, spoke only in a hushed whisper to disguise his vocal cadence, aggressively courted his own stepdaughter, made her swear to be faithful to him no matter what, and then vanished at the altar.
Just to emotionally trap her.
Exactly. His psychological goal was to leave her so heartbroken and bound by her promise that she would never look for another real husband.
It is incredibly twisted. But how on earth does Holmes prove this from his living room?
The trifle that breaks the case is a typewriter.
A typewriter?
Yeah. The stepfather had typed all of his romantic letters to Mary under the fake name Hosmer Angel, claiming he preferred it. But the real reason was that if he had handwritten them, she would have instantly recognized his penmanship.
Right, that makes sense.
However, Holmes understands the mechanics of early typewriters. The metal bars that strike the ribbon wear down over time, creating unique mechanical defects, kind of like a fingerprint. Holmes notices that the typewritten love letters have the exact same specific flaws, a slightly slurred letter E and a completely tailless R as a standard business letter typed by the stepfather on his office machine.
That is staggering. He uncovers an entire elaborate family betrayal just by looking at a sticky E on a piece of paper. But honestly, it makes you think. Doesn't that mean these criminals are actually putting exponentially more effort and intellect into their deceptions than it would take to just, I don't know, live an honest life?
That is the deep, tragic irony at the heart of so many of Conan Doyle's stories. The sheer caloric energy expended on maintaining a lie is immense, and we see this exact same dynamic play out in a much darker setting in the Boscombe Valley mystery.
Oh, right. This one is gritty.
Very. A local landowner named McCarthy is brutally murdered in the woods, and his own son is found standing over the body, accused of the crime. The son claims his father's bizarre dying words sounded like a rat. The official police dismiss this as the son just making up nonsense to sound crazy and establish an alibi.
But Holmes goes out to the muddy crime scene, and he basically reads the ground like a printed text. How does he pull so much data out of a swamp?
It comes down to understanding the physics of human movement and the specific properties of materials. By examining the depth and stride of the footprints in the soft mud, Holmes determines the murderer is a tall man who is lame in his right leg.
Because of the uneven weight distribution.
Exactly. A man with a limp places a heavier, deeper strike on his good foot and a shallower, dragging strike on his bad leg. He also finds cigar ash on the ground. But he doesn't just note that someone was smoking, he identifies it as the ash of an Indian cigar rolled in Rotterdam.
Wow, how does he know that?
Because that specific type of cigar produces a very distinct, dark, flaky ash that differs chemically from Havana or London blends.
And the crowning deduction is that phrase, a rat.
Because it wasn't an animal at all, right?
Precisely. The dying man wasn't saying a rat. He was trying to gasp out the word Ballarat, which is a famous gold mining region in Australia.
Unbelievable.
Holmes traces this linguistic clue back decades, realizing the murdered man had been viciously blackmailing his wealthy neighbor for years. The neighbor had been a highway robber in Ballarat in his youth and had ambushed the victim's gold convoy. So the neighbor was the killer.
Yes, the neighbor, who happens to be tall, left-handed, and walks with a limp, finally snapped and killed his tormentor to protect his family's reputation. The physical clues, the uneven mud, the flaky ash, they didn't just point to a suspect, they acted as a time machine, pointing the way back to a buried historical sin.
It really emphasizes how these hyper-specific physical trifles continually lead Holmes to uncover the secret, darker underbelly of so-called respectable society. Like, the deeper Holmes digs, the more we realize that Victorian London was just built on secrets.
It's a space where Conan Doyle aggressively peels back the curtain on the Victorian era's obsession with appearances. A prime example is The Man with the Twisted Lip.
Oh, this one is wild.
A highly respectable, wealthy businessman named Neville St. Clair goes missing. His wife happens to be walking through East London and is horrified to see her husband's face briefly appear at the second-story window of a notorious, dangerous opium den before he's violently yanked backward into the shadows.
Naturally, the police raid the den. But they don't find the respectable Neville. They find his clothes hidden in the room, and the only person there is a hideous, severely scarred beggar named Hugh Boone who makes his living on the streets.
And the police immediately arrest the beggar for murdering the businessman.
Of course they do. But Holmes realizes the physical reality just doesn't match the police theory. He literally takes an ordinary wet bath sponge into the police holding cell while the beggar is sleeping, firmly wipes the man's face, and washes away the thick grime and a painted-on scar. The missing wealthy husband and the hideous street beggar are the exact same person.
Which is just a brilliant reveal. St. Clair had been an investigative journalist who went undercover as a beggar years ago to write a story about the street economy. But he made a shocking discovery.
Which was?
Thanks to his skill with makeup and a sympathetic persona, he could make vastly more money begging on the street in a single day than he could ever make in a week at his respectable, educated job.
That's crazy.
So he just abandoned his career and lived a highly lucrative double life for years.
That completely subverts the Victorian ideal of the hardworking, respectable middle class. The idea that an educated man would willingly choose to smear his face with dirt and beg in the gutter simply because the economics were better, it must have been a totally scandalous concept for Doyle's original readers.
It entirely shatters the narrative of Victorian social progress. It suggests that respectability itself is merely a performance, a costume that is just as artificial as the beggar's grease paint. And what's truly profound is that the moment St. Clair is caught out by his wife, his social pride is so fragile that he initially prefers to let the police and his family believe he has been brutally murdered rather than admit to them that he makes his living asking for pennies.
Wow. Just wow. But sometimes the darkness Holmes uncovers is much more sinister than just wounded social pride. The deep dive sources also highlight what happens when the threats become lethal and the official law is totally inadequate to stop them.
We see this vividly in the Five Orange Pips, which introduces a deeply historical and transatlantic threat. A terrified young man named John Openshaw comes to Baker Street. His uncle, who had spent years living in the American South, and his father have both recently died under highly suspicious circumstances.
Right.
Before each death, they received an envelope containing 5 dried orange pips, or seeds, and a piece of paper stamped with the letters KKK.
The Ku Klux Klan. Yes. The narrative explains that Openshaw's uncle had apparently stolen a vital register containing the names of prominent Klan members when he abruptly fled America for England. And the society has ruthlessly tracked the family across the ocean to get those papers back. The pips are a warning that death is imminent if the papers aren't surrendered. And now, the young nephew, John Openshaw, has received his own envelope of orange pips.
What makes this story so critical to analyzing Holmes is that it represents a rare, devastating failure of his protective abilities. Holmes correctly deduces the origin of the letters and tells Openshaw to hurry home immediately and leave the papers out for the killers to find, hoping it'll buy enough time for Holmes to identify the culprits.
But the assassins are too fast.
They are. Openshaw's murdered on his way home, pushed into the river in the dark.
The official police, lacking Holmes's insight, simply write it off as an accidental drowning. But Holmes knows exactly what happened, and his reaction is unlike anything else in the stories.
Right, we see a sudden flash of raw, unfiltered emotion from the calculating machine. His professional pride is deeply wounded, and his sense of justice is completely outraged. Recognizing that the slow machinery of the British police will never catch these men, he bypasses the law entirely.
He takes matters into his own hands.
He does. He uses the postmarks on the warning letters to trace the killers to an American sailing ship, the Lone Star, that has just set sail from London back to the United States. And he seeks personal, poetic vengeance.
He actually squeezes out 5 orange pips himself, puts them in an envelope addressed directly to the captain of the ship, and rushes it onto a fast mail boat headed for their destination port in Georgia. He wants them to dock and immediately realize they are being hunted by someone smarter than them.
But the limits of human observation are finalized by the sheer power of the natural world. The law never catches the killers, and Holmes's letter is never delivered.
What happens?
A massive equinoctial storm, one of those brutal, violent seasonal gales that tear across the ocean during the change of seasons, intercepts the Lone Star in the mid-Atlantic. The ship is completely destroyed. Holmes's vengeance is preempted by nature itself. It's a really sobering reminder that while Holmes can read the history of a man in a muddy footprint, he is not a god.
Okay, let's bring all of these threads together. From a priceless gemstone hidden in the throat of a goose, to transatlantic assassins, to a greedy stepfather thwarted by the mechanical wear and tear of typewriter keys, these stories absolutely prove Haley Huntington's point. Conan Doyle managed to pack incredibly dense, complex webs of human psychology and physical logic into these rapid, single-sitting reads.
They teach us a completely different way to interface with reality. They prove that the bizarre is usually just a smokescreen, that the most vital truths are hidden in the mundane trifles we ignore, and that respectability is very often a meticulously maintained disguise.
But the true value of spending time with these sources isn't just learning how to identify the color of Rotterdam cigar ash in the mud. It is a masterclass in learning how to actively observe the world around you. The next time you walk down a busy street, you shouldn't just let your brain filter out the noise. When you see the battered hat, you shouldn't just see the object. You should look for the story it is silently broadcasting.
Because while Holmes read his world through physical objects like telegrams and pocket watches, the underlying principle of deduction remains exactly the same in our modern lives. The canvas has changed, but the mechanics of human behavior have not.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to ponder. If Sherlock Holmes were alive today, sitting in your living room, he wouldn't be looking for tallow stains on your brim. He would be looking at your digital exhaust. If he tracked your modern typewriter quirks, your metadata, your specific autocorrect habits, the exact timestamps and phrasing of your search histories, what kind of invisible, highly revealing narrative would the world's greatest detective instantly deduce about you, just from the device you're holding right now?